All right, you guys. First thing we're going to do is we are going to hop in with something that should be familiar to you guys. As we're going to talk about the American Revolution before we talk about the French Revolution. This will basically be a review of a lot of the information that you guys learned last year in AP U.S. History class. Now, we've all been taught the same thing since we've been kids, since about fifth grade, about, the cause of the American Revolution, no taxation without representation. And that's a big part of it. But I kind of want to go through some key events, some events that you guys may know, and some events that you guys may have forgotten. The first that I really want to talk about is the Proclamation Line of 1763. And this was right after the end of the French and Indian War. And King George III basically told the colonists, you can't live on the west side of the Appalachian Mountains. So basically like an imaginary line drawn all the way down the Appalachian Mountains on the east coast of the United States. And this was kind of that first act that colonists kind of resented the king for. So that's significant. And then you had taxes in those years between 1763 and 1770 before the Boston Massacre. Now, this painting, as you can see, is a little biased. You have almost a systematic line of soldiers firing upon the colonists. It was just a riot. I mean, you had colonists throwing snowballs full of ice and rocks at these British soldiers, and they fired. And nobody has any idea if the general told them to fire or not. But nevertheless, it created, a stir in the colonies in the aftermath of this. And then Boston just continued to be a hotbed. 3 years later, we have the Boston Tea Party. And you guys have probably definitely heard of that. Some patriots got together dressed as Mohawk Indians. Mohawks, not just a hairdo. There is a tribe called the Mohawks. And they dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. And obviously, this infuriated Parliament, and they responded with the coercive acts, which in America we call that the intolerable acts. And this did a lot of things. It took away Massachusetts' charter, it took away their legislature, and it also closed Boston Harbor. So this was a big, big deal to people living in Massachusetts, and especially people living in Boston. And then about a few months later, you have the first shots fired at Lexington and Concord, or the shot heard around the world, and nobody to this day is sure who fired that first shot. But what had happened was the colonists were trying to stockpile arms, to start a revolution. The British went to stop them. They met at Lexington and Concord. Bing, bang, boom, shots fired, and the Revolutionary War starts. But in my opinion, the Revolutionary War, it was started as a conflict, but it didn't really solidify until the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence came out right after Thomas Paine had published Common Sense. And this fiery pamphlet basically just said, we got to get away from England. And he said that the colonies need to make themselves independent from England, but that could only be achieved with a formal declaration. And that is where we get the Declaration of Independence, as delegates from each of the 13 colonies met in Philadelphia and drafted this declaration, signed it into effect on July 4th, 1776. So, 4th of July. And in the last NTI we did, you guys looked at that declaration, and I thought about including that, but I'm like, they've already looked at it. They don't need to look at it again. You guys read that in depth. But you can see the significance of it. There were definitely Enlightenment ideas present. That's why I had you guys do that argument over the Enlightenment. But it is also all these grievances over King George III. So if you want to look at any specifics, just Google it, and you can look at that. And that is the end of this little short video over the causes of the American Revolution. And in our next one, we will be going over the course of the American Revolution. So